Good evening and welcome to Views with Joyce Waddell. I want to thank you for joining us this evening. We have an interesting program for you. We're going to be talking with Mr. Davis Carmen as we talk about homeschooling, and that's our topic. We know that there are so many options for students now. Options in education that we never thought would ever happen, that we never thought we would ever see. And homeschooling is one of those. And we think about it, we think it's new, we think it's something that doesn't exist in Charlotte, North Carolina, but it does. So welcome.
Thank you.
Mr.
Good to be with you, Joyce.
What is homeschooling?
That's a great starting question. Homeschooling is basically where parents take the direction for the education of their kids. So it's typically called home education because it's happening in a home setting, but homeschoolers use all kinds of resources. Sometimes they use co-ops, tutors, private help, but most of it is happening at home, directed by the parents. So they're the ones taking responsibility for every decision, the curriculum, the schedule, and how they customize it for their particular family.
You know, as a state legislator, the largest item in our budget is for education. Mm-hmm. Yeah. So when we think about someone not taking advantage of what the public traditional setting has to offer, mm-hmm. and decide to do something different, do you get any money for what you do?
We do not. No, as a matter of fact, homeschoolers typically don't like to have the string attached with money because there's a large independent part of it where homeschool families want to have complete autonomy and control of what they're doing, and often money might bring a regulation or a restriction that maybe they wouldn't be pleased with. And so typically they're not in favor of something like that, but they certainly don't get any kind of money as of right now.
But you are a taxpayer.
Yes.
And you contribute to the education, public education. Yes. And so when you decide to do something different, you're not taking advantage of some of the dollars that you have invested.
That's very
in
true.
Education.
Yeah, that's very true. Now, one of the ways I personally like to think about it is I might be saving the state some money, because with 127,000 homeschoolers in the state, times the average amount of 10,000 plus or minus, that's a lot of money that the state would otherwise have to spend. So we're not taking advantage of the taxes we're paying, but we're probably saving the state some tax money as well.
Okay. There are some advantages, and I'm certain there are some disadvantages of what you do. Now, do you homeschool several children or just your own?
We homeschool all of our children. We have 7 in our family.
7 children.
7 children, and there
That's
have been
a lot,
times.
Isn't it?
It is by normal standards. 5 of them have graduated our homeschool. 2 are college graduates. 3 are in college right now, and then we have the 2 teenage boys at home. There have been times when we've joined forces with other families, and so we've shared resources with sometimes 2 or 3 families. Other times we've been in co-ops, which have been up to 30 families helping and sharing, for one day a week to get the most advantage of what others can bring to the table.
But there are some things that you miss out on in a public school setting. Your athletic programs.
Yes, athletics is definitely one, and that's probably the one that's the hardest to replace. And so what many families are doing, you see choirs crop up and being basically started from scratch. You even see athletic programs being started from scratch, although there's a lot more resources required to put together a team, and so those are harder to make happen. But my older boys played in a homeschool football league, and then we've played in other soccer clubs around towns, and to take advantage of the sports opportunities that we wanted our kids to have.
Now, the homeschool football league, how many different teams, and what's the schedule like, and where do you play? So you're inventing something that's already exists somewhere.
Yeah, it's very different now than it was when my older boys were playing in the homeschool league because it was literally a startup at that time. So they played local private schools and got demolished because we were very inexperienced. We played smaller private schools and were fairly competitive. It's really interesting. Just recently I was at the homeschool football team's practice and found out that they have played all across the state, playing lots of small and mid-sized private school teams. So they've grown in the last 10 or 15 years.
And so you have a tournament, and you have the best.
Right.
Okay.
Yeah.
And you have a championship.
They do, yeah.
Just
yes.
like any other situation.
They do. I forget the exact league, but it's one of the independent private school leagues that exist in the state.
Now, that's one of the disadvantages because if you have a regular job and you have to go to work, what happens to the children when are they left alone during the day?
No, that's one of the sacrifices most homeschool families actually have to make is they're typically a one-income family. There's no other way to make that work typically. Sometimes the parent that's staying home will have a part-time job working from home, which is possible these days with the internet and such. But where it becomes harder is for the single parent because in that situation, they have to be the breadwinner. And so it's much harder in those situations for single parents. However, there are some that are able to figure out how to make the ends meet and financially and to make the schedule work. But they're at home with the kids.
Now, what made you, of all the options available to you, and we have the magnet schools in Mecklenburg County. We have just a variety of options. We have Learning Academy. You have your art school, science, STEM schools. So with all of those things that are available, what made you want to do a homeschool?
Right. Well, everybody has their own unique story. Ours is different than others as well. I will say most families continue to home educate for different reasons than got them started. And so for us, it was negative reasons that got us started. We were at a good public school. Our oldest son went to a public school for 13 days, and he was in the same grade, kindergarten, as our next door neighbor. And what happened in those first 2 weeks, we saw differences between that child's experience and our child's experience, and we didn't understand what was going on. So I had, I talked to the teacher and the principal, several times those first few weeks, and then I initially asked for a teacher change because that was my assessment that we just needed a different teacher, like my neighbor had a different teacher. And that's when I found out I didn't have a whole lot of say in my child's actual education, and so they resisted that. And so after 2 weeks, I took him out of school. We didn't know what we were going to do on Monday, so we got on the waiting list for all the private schools. And over the course of that weekend, we made a decision to homeschool 1 year at a time. It was sort of an emergency mode decision to get started. And quite frankly, that first year was a horrible year of school. It was rocky, and that's an understatement. We didn't know what we were doing. But we've managed to find ourselves at a homeschool conference at the end of that first year. And that's when a light bulb went off.
Well, he was just in kindergarten anyway.
He was. That's right.
So you don't have compulsory school attendance until you reach the age of 7.
Exactly. He was only 6 at the time.
So he didn't have to even be there.
Right. And I didn't, as a new parent, I didn't know that. I didn't know what the compulsory laws were. It was time to register for kindergarten. So we just did that. So we learned a lot that first year. And then we learned a lot at this conference. And so we decided to start the second year by wiping the slate clean, primarily to figure out who is this son of ours and what does he need. Was he
active?
Is he ready? Oh, he was very active. Yeah, and so we were trying to figure out, is he ready to read? Is he ready to write? And not.
Is he still active as an adult?
Oh yes. He's 27 years old. He has a 2-year-old of his own. He's in graduate school, so I will say he was not ready to read when he was 6 or 7, so he was by normal standards late to read, but we found out that once he started reading, he took off like crazy, And of course, he's in graduate school now reading books that I've never read.
So, getting back to your reasons,
Yes.
something was happening. Well, the children were very different.
Oh, yes.
They brought their own personalities. Your child was very active. He didn't want to sit still.
Right.
And the other child was very different. He wanted to sit still.
Well, it may have been that. What we were noticing is the neighbor child was bringing paperwork and home and projects home from school, and our son didn't bring anything home for the first 2 weeks, and so that we were wondering what was happening, and that's when I started talking to the teacher and the principal to say, what are they doing? Are there any papers to bring home? And so we were personally losing confidence, primarily with the teacher, and we figured just a teacher change probably would have solved it. For us. Now, after 2 or 3 years of homeschooling, suddenly we had a taste of what this could do for our family, and then our reasons changed because we saw the positives of actually being together as a family. Most people think that you're going to drive each other crazy and not be able to stand being together that long.
But it didn't.
We found the exact opposite to be true. It was actually pretty ironic that I found that my wife and my son, who's very active, very boisterous as a young boy, were actually getting closer rather than more frustrating with each other. And so that gave us hope and a new vision for what homeschooling could do for our family relationships as much as anything. And of course, our kids were very young at the time.
Were all your children as active as that first one?
No, we with 7, we have 7 different personalities, 4 boys and 3 girls, 2 very strong-willed children, 2 very compliant children, 4 somewhere in the middle. We have philosophers, we have artists, we have missionaries, we have technologists. So we got a wide range of academic interests, a wide range of personalities. And so as we continued home education, one of the things that really motivated us to keep going was we were able to customize the education to each individual child. So for example, my second child, who is a graduate of an art school, we gave him a disproportionate amount of art because that's what he was interested in. Another child who was interested in biology, we gave them an overdose of biology and science and things related to their field of interest.
Now, how did you do that? Did you go out and create materials? Did you put them in a Central Piedmont class, some other partial school class with other children?
It was a wide range there as well. So
you had the one-room schoolhouse.
We basically did. I mean, it happened at our home, but of course the kids
Is
were
that
on
why-
the porch, family room, bedrooms, everywhere.
Now, when I met you at a display
Yes.
because you were the spokesperson for the homeschoolers. So did you go around speaking about homeschooling?
Not when we initially started. So my biography in homeschooling is pretty interesting, and it's not typical. We started with the 2x4 over the head, so we were very reluctant when we started. 3 years into this, we were pretty committed, and we said, let's do this all the way through through high school, even though that was years down the road, but we could see good potential. Then I took on some leadership roles in home education. I was on the North Carolinians for Home Education, which is a statewide board to promote and support homeschooling in the state of North Carolina. Then, 10 years ago, I actually acquired a homeschooling publishing company. So I have lots of skin in the game now. So now, today I sell books.
Do you own the publishing company?
Yes, yeah. So today I actually own a publishing company that develops curriculum specifically for homeschoolers.
Well, why would it be any different from the curriculum for just regular public school?
It's a great question.
It's different?
It's very different.
Did you write it?
No. I've hired authors to write the books. Here's the main difference is picturing a teacher with 30 students sitting in chairs versus a mom sitting with 3 kids on a couch. 3 different ages of kids sitting on a couch. So a 5, 8, and 11-year-old. And so the curriculum is written with that kind of setting in mind. That
you're going to be homeschooling more than one child.
Right.
Audience, we're continuing to talk with Mr. Davis. Mr. Davis is an author, he's a publisher, and not only that, he's a promoter. So he talks about homeschool and what his experience with his own children is. Reminds me of what Piaget did, because he
Right.
studied his own children. So we're learning a lot, and we're learning a lot that's different. It's in education when it comes to what one parent can do in their own home. So you heard of Piaget, didn't you?
I'm sorry?
Did you hear the psychologist Piaget?
No.
He studied his own children
Okay.
and developed stages of learning
Okay.
and what kids were able to do and to learn at certain ages.
Okay.
Mhm.
Okay.
So then you developed the curriculum.
Right. Yeah. So the
Is
curriculum.
it your own?
No. I mean, so when we were homeschooling in the early years, we used curriculum that was available that homeschoolers were starting to develop. Really, since '83, that's 1983 is about the beginning of the modern homeschool movement, and as it's grown from nothing to, 2 million students across the country today,
And how many in North Carolina?
127,000 students. in North Carolina.
127,000 students. In how many in Charlotte?
There's about 8,000 students.
That's enough to be in one school, isn't it?
Absolutely. Absolutely.
In one
That's
public school.
A very big one. Yeah.
8,000 students.
Yeah.
That's enough to be in more than 5 public schools,
Yes.
isn't it?
Yes. Yeah, that's just in Mecklenburg County.
8,000.
Yeah.
Well,
Yeah, 3 or 4,000 in Union County.
Well, why is it growing?
Well, that's a good question too. There's lots of research that's been done
Is
recently.
it growing?
It is. It's definitely growing.
And how fast and how rapid is it growing?
Today it's different estimates are 7 to 10% a year, but you definitely see that with the ups and downs. But there were a couple years recently where it was under 10%, but so 7 to 10% currently.
So with 8,000 students in Mecklenburg County, and a normal elementary school has about 700 students,
Okay.
and high school is about 15 to 2,000 students.
Okay.
So that would be equivalent to
Several schools, yes.
about 9 schools,
Yeah.
9 brick
Yeah.
and mortar schools.
Yeah, that are happening in individual homes, 2 or 3 kids at a
Well,
time.
is there a time when the state or someone who oversees what you do come in and say to a parent, you're not doing it like you should be doing it, we're going to shut you down because you're not achieving like you should be achieving, and the students are not learning like they should be learning? Does that ever happen?
That I don't know of any cases where that happens. Now, because there's so many homeschoolers in the state, it'd be a difficult task to get
somebody
too deep into.
regulates.
It is regulated, and here's what typically happens. In North Carolina, you notify the state that you're going to homeschool, and then there's 3 legal requirements. You keep attendance records, immunization records, and you have to take a standardized test with your children once a year.
Who takes
So-
the test? You or the children?
The children. The children
Just
take
one
the test.
test?
They have to take the test, and there's no minimum score. They just have to take the test as the
and
legal
no-
requirement.
Do they give you the test?
No, as a parent,
you
you get to
select
pick.
whatever you want?
Right. So I've picked about a dozen or half a dozen different tests for my kids through the years.
And what do you do with the results? Do you keep them?
I keep
Do
them.
you share them with the state?
No.
You don't have to
well,
do that.
You let the state know that you took the test, and in the beginning, I typically sent my test scores to the state to prove that I took the test, and then as I became more
That
familiar,
your children took the
or that
test.
my children took the test, yes, and then as I became more familiar with the process, what happened is the state would then typically take a family who was in their first or second year of homeschooling, and they would have a communication with those few families to make sure they were keeping the legal requirements, get them started on the right track, and then would generally assume that they would continue to do so.
Or is there any education system in Mecklenburg County that regulates what you're doing?
No.
Like students take the end of the grade test.
Right.
And they take the achievement test, so that there's nobody.
We don't do that in homeschooling. Yeah, there's nobody in the individual counties.
Nobody in
Only-
Mecklenburg County.
No, only in Raleigh as a state do they have the records of each of the schools, and if they're still in operation, and if they're keeping those 3 legal requirements.
And the three legal requirements: immunization, attendance, and tests.
And take a test. Just take a test. There's no minimum score that you're required
Now
because there's
tell-
no
Tell
specific
me,
test. Yes.
now since you are one of the head persons who are responsible for homeschooling and one of the main advocates, you're a strong advocate, aren't
Yes, yes, absolutely.
you, of homeschooling, the achievement level, the preparation level for higher level learning, and when students leave school, preparation for going on to college, careers, the military, or the world of work. How does that factor in what you do, and who makes sure that students are prepared for that?
Right. No, that's a great question. What happens after they graduate? So 10 or more years
Yeah,
ago.
how you prepare them for it.
Exactly. 10 or more years ago, colleges weren't sure how to handle homeschool graduates from high school. Would they be good students in college? Would they be good in the military? Would they be good in the workforce? And so it was about 10 years ago that you saw the transition happening where colleges realized these were really good students. They stay out of trouble, they're serious about their studies, and they were very well prepared. And so my personal children's experience, my oldest graduated in 2009, and for us it's been smoother and smoother sailing every year because the colleges want homeschoolers. As an example, where one of my daughters goes to school in New York City, and 2 years ago, under 10% of their entering freshmen were homeschoolers. 1 year ago, it was 14%, and this year, 21% of their incoming class was homeschoolers.
At that particular school.
Yes, because they saw them as the kind of students they wanted at this particular school in New York City.
At that particular school, at that
Right.
particular time,
Yeah.
with that particular major.
Well, maybe or not. It's a
Art school.
well, no. This particular school is philosophy, politics, economics, and culture and media. That's their primary emphasis. But even my son, who went to an art school in Atlanta, he was very heavily recruited because of his portfolio primarily. But he was a candidate for valedictorian, and I attribute a lot of that to just all the preparation he had. So he certainly did well. My students my children have done really well. But in general, colleges are seeing that homeschoolers make good students. Now the research in terms of academic scores is showing the same thing. I have to tell you a really interesting stat. Many years ago.
So it shows, the research shows that the homeschooler, when it comes to achievement, all A's, all B's, all C's, it's the same as someone in a traditional school.
Right. They're academically they're performing as well and oftentimes better. On scores like the SAT, the data showed several years ago that homeschoolers typically scored 30 points higher than non-homeschoolers. And so they redid that same research. This was the National Center for Educational Stats, so a national non-homeschooling biased organization. And when they did it recently with so many more homeschoolers, as an advocate, I was one who was a little concerned that the scores would probably come down, and they actually went up. And so the stats show that homeschoolers are doing very well just from a pure academic standpoint, as well as being able to manage their time well, stay out of trouble, be good contributors to the school, good citizens, and all the things that we would typically say are valuable for seeing that somebody's maturing and becoming productive young adults.
Now, if you had predictions, if you had predicted your oldest son, the one who first started kindergarten, and you took him out and did homeschooling, if you had a prediction about what would his achievement level have been, or what would have ensued during his educational career that first year, what would you have predicted?
He would have failed miserably. Oh, yes. I have at least 2 children that by the...
Do you really think so?
Absolutely, I guarantee it. And here's why. Because my wife and I trained and educated our children for completely different standards. And so the standards that are often considered, did a kid succeed in school, my kids would fail. because we didn't concentrate on that. We concentrated on, I'll say your basic 3 R's: reading, writing, arithmetic, history, Bible.
What about science?
Science, definitely. Philosophy, which my children were very interested in that.
And
so
Bible, you did a lot.
we did a lot of Bible, a lot of philosophy, and so things like that.
Did you steer them in the direction to which they ultimately chose?
Well, I would say we paid attention to their bent, to their interest.
Could you have steered them in something else that you wanted more than anything?
Well,
Say if you wanted them to be in law, medicine, could you have steered them in that direction early on?
Yeah, I think every parent has that influence, but and that's the hard part as a parent, to try and figure out who is this child, what are their interests and abilities. And with some of my kids, it changed. One was interested in being a vet when he was young, and so we took a lot of biology then. Then he changed course and was more interested in the arts. And so we changed as our kids expressed a new interest and a new skill level.
So you changed depending upon the child's interest.
Right.
And you saw that the student changed as
and then tried to guide them based on conversations, how they were doing on different subjects, and what they expressed as interest.
Do you have any regrets?
No. As a matter of fact, we're in our 21st year of homeschooling right now. And there's oftentimes my wife and I look at each other and we are grateful for that 2x4 over the head, because homeschooling was not part of our plan. I mean, it wasn't.
So you have no regrets. There's nothing that says to you, if you had to do it again, given the same opportunities, the same circumstances, that you would do it differently and put them in traditional public school.
No, I would definitely homeschool. We're definitely advocates for that. I hope my kids homeschool. However, I know they will homeschool very differently than I did, because there's so much new resources available.
And there's so many influences
There are.
in society, social influences
Right.
that cause children to be distracted, that cause children to be interested in other things. I want to thank you so much for being with us and for sharing with us on Views with Joyce Waddell.
Thank you, Joyce.